Hello, my name is Casey Halper.
And I am Audrey Kent.
We are the co-chairs of Jewish Federation's Wellness Network and are proud to be a part of tonight's event. Conversations about anxiety and emotional well-being are always important to us, and even more so during this trying time.
Thank you for joining us for this important live webinar with Sophie and Deborah Riegel. Before we introduce Sophie and Deborah, allow us to share with you a few words about Federation.
Federation continues to work very hard in keeping our community socially connected during this very disconnected time. Today's program is just one of a robust series of virtual events that Federation has been offering over the last few weeks.
Federation is in close touch with all of our partner agencies who are on the front line of the COVID-19 crisis. To date, Federation has distributed over $300,000 to the community for PPE, economic relief, food for seniors, and refilling food pantries. The needs continue to mount, so your generosity is more critical than ever. If you haven't yet made a donation to Federation, please consider doing so now at jfnnj.org/donate.
Before we turn the program over to Sophie and Deborah, allow us to share a little about this dynamic duo. Sophie is a freshman at Duke University and a professional author and speaker. She is the author of Don't Tell Me to Relax, One Teen's Journey to Survive Anxiety and How You Can Too, and Overcoming Overthinking, 36 Ways to Tame Anxiety for Work, School, and Life. Sophie is a mental health advocate who openly speaks about her experiences. She was recently featured on the Tamron Hall Show and recorded her first TED Talk.
Deborah is an executive coach, speaker, and author who helps leaders and teams present and communicate with less stress and more success. Her clients range from Amazon and Bloomberg to Kraft Foods and the U.S. Army.
Sophie and Deborah are happy to answer questions at the end of their presentation. Feel free to ask a question in either the Q&A or the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Audrey and I will share your questions with Sophie and Deborah. So with no further ado, here are Sophie and Deborah.
Hey everyone, I'm Sophie.
And I'm Deborah.
And we are so excited to be doing this program for everyone today. And our program is titled How to Talk About Anxiety Without It Making You Anxious. But before we begin, we want to share a little bit about ourselves and our own stories and our own experiences with mental health. So for me, I've been diagnosed with 4 different anxiety disorders, from obsessive compulsive disorder to trichotillomania, which is a hair pulling disorder, to generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. And I've really struggled with a lot of these throughout middle school and high school. And I was pretty severely bullied because of my anxiety and my obsessions and compulsions. And in 7th grade, I gave a presentation to my class about what it's like living with OCD. And all the people who had bullied me came up to me and apologized. And I realized just how important it is to reach out and educate people about mental health and mental illness. And because of that, and I went home that day and I started writing my book, Don't Tell Me to Relax. And Don't Tell Me to Relax talks a lot about my experience with mental illness, from coming out about it, getting a diagnosis, to getting treatment, from medication to therapy, to rescuing a dog who helped me, and talking about how all of this led me to being the valedictorian of our high school, going to Duke University, and being a professional speaker.
So one thing that Sophie didn't share about herself that I will say as the Kfelling mother is that she is highly competitive. And probably you know that from hearing that she was valedictorian and is attending Duke University. She is also a 5-time All-American and national champion race walker. So she's got competition in her bones. And when it comes to anxiety disorders, there's no exception there. She has 4 anxiety disorders. I only have 3. She really does win them all, if you can call that winning. So I'm Deborah Grayson Riegel, and at most recently just known as Sophie's mom. And I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder when I was a kid. When I was in my 30s, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and I was also diagnosed with a tic disorder in my 40s, despite the fact that I know that I had had a tic disorder from the time that I was very, very young. So one of the things that I want to share with you is that dealing with anxiety is a lifelong disorder. And so it's something that I've dealt with from the time that I was very young to the time that I was older, not old, but older like now. And one of the things that I have learned is that inspiration for managing anxiety can come from lots of places. And I know that because it never had occurred to me to get significant help for my anxiety, including medication, until Sophie really intervened and said, I'm getting handled now. What about you? And we are here again to talk to you today about what it's like to live with anxiety, but more importantly, some strategies that you can use for yourself or with anybody else in your life who may be wrestling with anxiety. So we are going to dig in with our first strategy.
Mark Brackett at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence said, labeling your emotions is key. If you can name it, you can tame it. And one of the strategies that we talk about in our book is naming it to tame it. And what that means is that once you have an idea and once you can name what you're dealing with, so for me, I was dealing with OCD, I was more able to manage it and control it. And what's also important to note is that having emotional fluency is really important. So instead of saying things like I'm sad or happy or angry, there are more specific words to describe exactly how you're feeling, and having these words is a really important tool in dealing with the emotion.
So we're going to ask you to name it to tame it. And we recognize that at this particular time, maybe a little bit unlike other times, your feelings may be changing every minute of the day, as opposed to holding a mood for a while. So we want to invite you to use the list that is now the smallest font. And I realized that when we wrote this book a year ago, I was a lot younger and could read that small font. But we want to invite you to use the smallest font list, which is the most nuanced list of emotions that we have there. And in the chat box or in the Q&A box, if you would please share with us 1, 2, or 3 emotions that you are feeling right now. Okay. So I'm seeing one worried, nervous, overwhelmed, tired, thankful, overwhelmed, insignificant, and inadequate. Thank you for sharing that with us. Frightened, energetic. Yeah, so I'm noticing a range and a lot of nuances around the language that you're using here to describe it. And one thing that I just want to share with you that you might notice from this list is that there are a lot more negative emotions than there are positive ones. And that's not just for this list. That is actually true in the science of emotional intelligence. And the reason that there are far many more negative emotions and words for negative emotions than positive emotions is that the purpose of negative emotions is to protect us, right? So you may be saying that you're feeling frightened or insignificant or overwhelmed. Those emotions are there to protect us as much as they also cost us a sense of comfort and peace. So when you think about it, emotions like fear originated to keep us from being eaten by animals, right? We needed to be scared of them.
These are evolutionary protective factors.
Thank you, my dear Duke. And emotions like disgust were there to keep you from eating things that were poisonous or from sleeping with your blood relatives. And if that doesn't disgust you, then we should talk offline. So our very first strategy is name it to tame it. If you can give very clear, nuanced language to describe how you're feeling, it actually will take the heat of the emotion down and allow you to handle it. Okay, so shall we move to our second strategy?
Let's do it.
So we're going to move to our second strategy. And our second strategy is talk about your happy list. So the first thing about talking about a happy list is that we invite you to make a happy list. And if you have somebody in your life who's anxious, who isn't you, is to invite them to create and share a happy list. So I want to share with you a little bit about how I came to create a happy list. About a year and a half ago, I was in Berlin, which I have to tell you is my new favorite city in the entire world. And I say that as a native New Yorker. So I come from a really good city. But when I went to Berlin, it knocked Hong Kong out of the top spot. And I was sitting in a cafe and I had ordered a coffee, and my coffee came over to me in this cafe and it had a design on it. Now, that's not something that only happens in Berlin. That's not something that cost me an extra, 10 euros to get. But I realized that a little design on my coffee made me disproportionately happy to the cost of it and the accessibility of it. It's accessible and it's inexpensive. And it was in that moment, sitting in a cafe in Berlin, that I said, I want to keep available to me in my phone, which is where I keep my happy list. And now, of course, I keep it published in a book as well. But I want to keep a list of things that I can access almost at any time and that don't have a high barrier to entry like cost. So that's what helped me create my happy list. And we want to invite you tonight to think about some of these 8 categories. So you want to read these out?
Yeah. So my mantra: a place in my home, a taste, a person, smells, a song or sounds, an object, and an activity. And I think something on my happy list that we do almost every day is we go on walks together.
We do. Yep. So that's a place outside our home, but it's definitely an activity. And at the end of it, we smell. So if you'll take a moment in the Q&A box or the chat box, will you share with us something that would be on your happy list? All right.
Cooking with my son.
Yeah, spring, right? And I love spring. And for me, it isn't always accessible, right? So it would definitely go on a happy list, but I can't always have it. So I might have a spring smelling candle. Ice cream, yes. I want to tell you how much, dear Wendy Strong, ice cream is on my happy list. For Mother's Day, which is coming up this Sunday, in case anybody forgot, I ordered myself 10 gourmet pints of ice cream for myself.
I'm having some.
We'll see about that. That goes on my sad list if you want to have some. Gardening, sitting in your yard and playing guitar, sunrise jogs, beach walks, national parks, going for a run. Beautiful. Oh, I love dinosaurs. Excellent.
I hope they're not accessible.
I hope they're not accessible. But I love the dinosaurs. I have to say that might be the most unique thing we've seen on somebody's happy list. So Sophie and I got a Facebook message over winter break from somebody who had read our book and was on the beach with his daughter making the happy list together. So before we move from your happy list, I want to ask you to think about who in your life, whether it's a work colleague or somebody who lives in your house or somebody who you're missing, who in your life would you like to introduce the concept of a happy list to? Because you think it could be helpful as an activity or something to help them reduce their anxiety. Grandchildren, lovely. And I bet they would love to hear what's on yours. Good. Who else might you want to introduce this idea to? Again, low cost of entry,
My
affordable.
daughter, my son.
Yeah, terrific. Some friends, a close friend of yours from out of state who's about to graduate high school, your mom, terrific. So please don't keep your happy list to yourself, and please share the concept of having a list of things that you can access only, almost any time as a strategy to help you reduce your anxiety. And Mary and Steve and Becky. Okay, great. So we're going to move to our 3rd out of 4 strategies, just so that you can map along with us. And this one is watch your language.
Watch your language. All right, so we're going to do a little role play of what a conversation might look like about anxiety.
Okay.
Mom, what's going on?
Well, I'll tell you something that is making me anxious, since that seems to be the topic. So right now I am feeling very relieved that our governor here in New York is sort of making all the decisions, and the decision is stay home, don't go out if you don't have to. But I do know that at some point I'm going to have to make some decisions, and that is worrying me about what I'm going to do when I have to make the decisions.
I don't think you have anything to worry about.
I know it seem that way, but right now it's the thought that keeps ruminating in my head.
You just got to get over it.
I'm having trouble getting over it.
And just relax.
Okay.
And scene.
And scene.
So
okay.
We just showed, I mean, a lot of people use this language, saying things like just relax, just get over it, you have nothing to worry about. And while it may seem like you're being helpful, it's really not supportive to the other person.
Yeah. And I want to just say one other thing about language that seems helpful. I don't know how helpful that seemed, but it's language that seems helpful that isn't particularly helpful. So to say to somebody, yeah, I'm seeing here toxic positivity. Excellent, Stephanie. Thank you. So there's other language that sounds like, you know, you're so capable. You make great decisions. You've got this, which also feels helpful, but is actually denying the person's mindset and existence.
Like
right
you
now.
always get through this.
You always get through this. Yeah, but right now that's not helpful.
Right.
Okay.
So when we talk about language, what we need to talk about is how do we change our language and how do we have more supportive language. So if we do the situation again.
I'm going to do the situation again.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So one of the things that I'm worried about is how am I going to make hard decisions that feel like life or death decisions when I don't really have rules to follow?
Yeah, that must feel really hard and frustrating.
It feels hard and frustrating and scary.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
It's life or death. Like, no joking, life or death.
Yeah, I totally get it. And
Yeah.
I'm here for you for whatever you need.
Thank you. But you can have my ice cream.
I'm having your ice cream.
Okay, scene. So in that second scenario, Sophie was using language that met me where I am, that didn't try to move me somewhere else, didn't try to convince me of something. We have a phrase that we use for this, which is
meet them before you move them.
Meet them before you move them. So before you take any step towards pass and go, collecting $200, any step towards trying to convince somebody to see another way of looking at it, another perspective, they need to fully believe that you have come to understand and appreciate and value their perspective now, which is, wow, that does sound hard. Tell me more about what that's like for you, is the kind of language we want to be using. And Sophie, I want to just make a note before we move to our fourth and final topic that you recently gave a TED Talk, which is up on TED.com, about another way for us to be thinking about watching our language. Can you just talk about that for a minute or two?
Absolutely. So a lot of times when people talk about mental health, they say things like mental health issues or mental health problems. And it seems, you know, innocent. It doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you have the word issues and problems, it has a really negative connotation. So I did a lot of research about this and how medical forums use these terms, issues and problems, for mental illness, but not for physical illness. And I came up with some strategies for how to use different language. So instead of saying mental health issue, you can say mental health concern, a mental health challenge, or just mental illness. These are very neutral terms to use. So just important to keep in mind that the words you use have a connotation, and what that connotation does can create stigma.
Right. Thank you. So we're going to move to our fourth strategy before we wrap up our part and turn it over for some Q&A for all of you, which is ask for help and be specific. And we want you to look at this in two ways. So the first is, if you're asking for help, assume that people don't know how to help other than I'm here to fix it for you, right? Assume that's all anybody knows how to do. And if somebody asks you for help, don't assume that they want you to fix it for them. Provide them perhaps with either a question like, what kind of help would be most helpful right now, or a list of options. And so we're going to walk through this list of options of ways that you can be helpful to folks other than let me roll my sleeves up and just fix it for you, which is our very last choice here. So, hey, would you like me to
Listen without judgment,
ask some open-ended questions,
play devil's advocate,
brainstorm 20 new ideas with you,
Empathize.
Connect you to an expert.
Teach you a skill.
Share my own experience or path.
Give you a pep talk or cheerlead.
Help you prioritize.
Take notes while you download your thoughts.
Help you develop some evaluation criteria.
Do it with you.
Send you some articles, videos, and other resources.
Or fix it for you.
There we go. So those are just 15 options. And really this list came out of the idea from psychologist Abraham Maslow, who is the one who originated the phrase that when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. It's called the law of the instrument. And most of us have one instrument, which is let me go in there and fix it for you, or problem solve it for you. Well, here you got 14 other instruments. So in the chat box or the Q&A, we would like to hear from you from this list. What would count as help for you if you are feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or anxious, or anything other than your best self? What would count as really helpful help for you other than have somebody fix it for you? And this is an open book test, by the way. You are welcome to use whatever you see on the screen, or feel free to add something new.
Listen without judgment and a pep talk.
Yeah. Teach me a skill. Listen without judgment. Share your own experience, help prioritize.
Empathize, pep talk.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah. And I have to share with you that in my role as an executive coach, the one way that I help that surprises my clients because they didn't think they could ask for it is if I say to them, do you just want to download your thoughts and I'll take some notes and then I'll send you the notes after, but you're not worried about keeping track? And they go, you could do that for me? And I said, yeah, I can do that for you. And just to give somebody the opportunity to think without having to track it is often a great gift. We have a couple more answers here. Empathize and help prioritize, share experience and thoughts, and listen without judgment. Okay, so we have done a lot of talking here, and hopefully some of it was helpful to you. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to stop sharing our screen here, and we're going to turn it over to all of you for some questions. And we want to just say that we reserve the right to remind you that we are not clinicians. We are not psychologists or psychiatrists. I have a master's in social work, but I'm not a licensed social worker. And if there's a question that we feel we can't answer online, we'll be happy to give you our email and you can reach us offline.
Thank you so much. The information was incredibly helpful, and I love that you made it interactive. It was really unique than any other webinar I participated in. So I just wanted to start with that thank you before we go to questions. And I think we'll get started. So how can we talk to adolescents who appear anxious, withdrawn, kind of shut off, especially now when we're all home? I know you addressed this in that we want to encourage them to shake it off, but can you give us other ways to, I know you said understand where they are, but how we can help them when they don't seem as open? Mm-hmm.
So I heard you on the Tamron Hall show share a little bit about your perspective of what parents should do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit about that here?
Yeah. And parents never like this advice, but I think it's really good. Parents need to know that their kid needs to talk to someone, but it doesn't need to be them. And parents often feel very offended that their kid doesn't want to talk to them, but a parent's job is to have their kid's best interest, and their kid's best interest is to talk to someone that doesn't necessarily have to be them. So that can be an aunt, a cousin, a friend, a teacher. It can be anyone as long as they're talking to someone.
Yeah. So I want to just read a second from our book because I want to get this right. This is some advice from NAMI, which stands for
National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Right. And so they say that when you are reaching out for help, you want to reach out to people that you feel closest to and who are emotionally skilled. And as much as we parents want to think that we are the closest person to our kid and we are brilliantly emotionally skilled, our kid may not experience us this way. And so my thought has always been, my kid doesn't have to talk to me but they have to choose someone. And I really, don't care who it is, but they need somebody to talk to. And I would hold them responsible for finding somebody and letting us know who that is.
Thank you. That's helpful. Here's a question. What's the best way to stop that cycle of anxiety, or one way that you can help stop that cycle?
Yeah, hold on one second. So we're noticing that we've got some questions coming in about book titles. If you go to sophieriegel.com, which we're going to put right in there, you will find all the information that you need. So how do you stop the cycle of anxiety? So I think there is...
Oh, that's not my website.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay.
There's no L in it. That was my email.
Oh, okay. Got it. So how do you stop the cycle of anxiety? I think it's important for us to take a step back there and talk about the difference between anxiety and an anxiety disorder. And again, we want to be clear that we are lay people when it comes to this topic, but from the inside, because we both have anxiety disorders. So do you want to talk a little bit about anxiety versus anxiety disorder?
Definitely. So the major difference is that anxiety disorder negatively interferes with your life in a way that like you have impaired functioning, distress, and those are some of the criteria that's in like the DSM and things like that, which is not important to go through right now. But it's really important to note that when the anxiety is interfering with your daily life, your tasks, whatever you have to get done in a way that you are unable to get things done, that's when it becomes more of an anxiety disorder.
Yeah. And so if you're in a cycle of anxiety, we highly suggest that you go talk to a professional about that who can help you make a distinction between anxiety and an anxiety disorder. And for the sort of average Joe or Jane that feels like they're more anxious than they want to be and not ready or wanting to go get help, or maybe it's not accessible. One of the models that we often talk about is that your thoughts drive your feelings and your feelings drive your behaviors, and then your behaviors go back and impact your thoughts. So what is anxiety? Anxiety is a feeling, and we invite you that if you notice this feeling recurring, see if you can back it up into what you are thinking, right? So what do you notice about what you are thinking right before you start to feel anxiety, which shows up in different people's, bodies in different places? For me, it sits in my throat and my jaw.
That's for me, it's my stomach.
For you, it's your stomach. There you go. Which means you really probably shouldn't have ice cream. But to back it up and to see what the thoughts are that are driving it. And one of the beautiful things about thoughts is that for most of us, our thinking is something we can change. It is within our control. If you notice that you can't, that you are having a really, really hard time changing your thinking, that's another indication that it's time for you to get some outside help.
Definitely. And that's one of the main things that is discussed in cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
Is there a strategy you suggest for young children who seem overwhelmed right now?
The slippery turkey. Let's do it.
Slippery turkey?
Let's do it.
Okay, we're going to talk about a slippery turkey. Okay. Do you want to talk about slippery turkey?
You can start.
Okay. So this is a tool that I use with grown-ups. And we think it's delightful enough that you can talk to a child. So a couple of things before we talk about a big slippery turkey. But, one of the things that kids don't have is that emotional fluency, right? So when we looked at that list of all that like 2-point font emotions, kids don't have that. So if you think about thoughts lead to feelings and feelings lead to behaviors, your chances are with a little kid, you're looking at behaviors, right? And you're trying to back them up from, I notice you acting this way or behaving this way or saying or not saying things. What are you feeling before that? And then what's the thought behind that? So that help them have their vocabulary and see if they can track it back.
And often kids will say things like my stomach hurts or I don't feel well when they really mean they're anxious, and kind of learning to tease that apart, what that really means, and giving them a word for it is really important as well.
Yeah, right, which is naming it to tame it as well. But I think for people of any age, I like to talk about a giant, hot, slippery turkey. And today I used this at an 8th grade Jewish day school where I did a little career day, and the person that I did it with was a vegetarian. So anyway, I digress. We moved it to a fruit platter. It was okay. So imagine that it's Thanksgiving or Shabbos dinner or something like that, and somebody is wrestling a giant hot slippery turkey out of the oven. And of course, it's in like a flimsy aluminum pan, not the right kind. So like hot turkey juice is splooshing on your foot and that sort of thing. And you bring it to the table and you're exhausted and you put it down on the table and you're like, well, we're going to eat this, right? That is the attitude of somebody who thinks they need to eat that turkey in one bite. And of course, your guests are looking perplexed at you and they go, well, nobody would expect you to eat this giant, hot, slippery mass on its own. Let's cut it into parts. So with a turkey, you cut it into a bunch of parts. And then after you've cut it into parts, you decide which part you want to put on your plate. You put a part on your plate, and then you decide what the first bite is.
And you can decide if you want to put parts on other people's plates.
You can put parts on other people's plates as well. So what that has to do with anxiety is often associated with somebody feeling overwhelmed. And so we invite people of all ages to think about how can we take this amorphous problem or challenge that you're feeling, whether it's external or internal, and name some of the parts that go into it. And then which of these parts feels like you want to know more about? Or the question that I asked this student today was, who was talking about how sad she is that her summer camp isn't going to happen. I said, which of all of the parts that you named do you have a little bit of control over, as opposed to the others where you're like, there's nothing I can do about that. And the part that she put on her plate, it wasn't a turkey, it was a fruit platter, but the part that she put on her plate was feeling like she is disconnected from her camp friends. And she realized she does have some control over connecting to her camp friends. And so that was the piece she put on her plate. And she identified that setting up a Zoom call was the first bite. And I think that would work for children of all ages from, 6 to 99 and above.
Higher.
Or higher, yes.
That's great. How do you get people to take your anxiety seriously rather than them just blowing it off?
I wrote a book about mine. That was pretty serious.
Yeah, we suggest you find an agent and a publisher and get that handled.
But I think a huge part of it is educating and talking about the difference between anxiety and an anxiety disorder, and really just explaining the fact that this affects me in a different way than how you might experience it or how you might see it, and just share your point of view. I think that's important. And the fact that talking about the fact that a mental illness is a real thing and it affects 20% of the population, I think makes it much more serious.
Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of giving feedback about the impact that people are having on you. That's my day job, is helping leaders and teams get better at communicating feedback and to assume positive intent. So, if I thought Sophie were blowing off my anxiety, that would be out of character. But if I did, I would say to her, I have a feeling you're completely unaware of this, so I want to bring something to your attention. When you say, it's no big deal, when I tell you something that I'm worried about, here's the impact it has on me. It makes me feel like you don't take me seriously, or it makes me feel like you're not really listening to me.
Or I'm not being taken seriously.
Yeah, that I'm not being taken seriously and I'm not being listened to. And I wanted to find out from you, when you say it's no big deal, what are you thinking, right? So get a little bit more information as well.
Can anxiety only be treated with medication?
No. So actually, most people who have anxiety, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, don't use medication. I think there's a huge amount of stigma surrounding medication, but therapy works, having family support system. There are lots of different ways to treat anxiety besides medication.
So we have time for another question or two if anyone wants to share. I see one here that says, how can you convince someone to go to therapy or get help?
I think the short answer is you can't convince someone to do something they don't want to do. But I think the longer answer is the idea of meeting them before you move them. And I like to talk about, can I do this? This and the shit. I'm gonna.
Yeah. So for anybody who has young children, turn your audio off for a second, because there's about to be a curse word.
Whatever. Okay. It's fine.
It's not a bad curse word.
It's a medium level.
It's a medium level curse word.
Okay. Anyways, we have this idea that we talk about in the book, that you have two kinds of friends. And one kind of friend is the sit in the shit kind of friend. And the other kind of friend is the pull me out of the poop. And when you're dealing with anxiety or feeling overwhelmed or anything, stress, you have a friend who's going to sit in the shit with you, and that's the person who's going to meet you, not move you. So sitting in a pile of shit, you're both really stinky. And I love saying shit in front of my mom because I can. And
You can't.
I can.
You can't.
Shit.
Okay.
Anyways, you have this person who's sitting in this pile of shit with you. And this is the person who is going to understand and talk you through what's going on in this moment. Yeah. So that's the person that you want to not move you, but to meet you. And then you have the pull you out of the poop person, who's going to be the person who says, you know, let's go to therapy, let's go for a walk, whatever it may be. But in order for someone to trust you, that you know what you're talking about, and for them to listen to you that you should go to therapy, they need to be able to meet you first. So they know what this pile of shit feels like.
Yeah, that was graphic. Thanks, Sophie. And I just want to add another layer to that, which is it really depends on the age of the person and the nature of your relationship. Right. So, you know, you might have an 8-year-old who's anxious, who doesn't want to go to therapy. And I don't know that they really get to choose. You might have a teenager where you're actually figuring out how many deposits have you made in your relationship bank account, where dragging somebody to therapy, you're willing to make the withdrawal. And if it's a spouse or partner, you would hope that they would do it for you. If they not do it for them, that they would do it for you and for the relationship. And really, unless you're dealing with a child, you can't make anybody go. I'm also noticing a question in the question box. Can we take a moment to answer that?
Absolutely. I was just going to let you know about that.
We'll leave the name out.
Yeah. But the question is, how can I become confident in being an advocate and a leader in the mental health world, especially because there's so much stigma and things like that. And I think one of the things that I talk about is that you need to do it for yourself and not for other people. And so I didn't write the book I wrote the book because I wanted to help other people, but I also did it for myself because it was a coping mechanism for me. And so you don't want to do anything that you don't want to do. And being confident in being a mental health leader means knowing that you're going to get backlash, knowing that people are going to criticize you or whatever it might be, and asking yourself, are you going to be okay with that? Are you going to be able to say, there is so much good that's happening that I can ignore all the bad stuff? Right. And that's a tough question that you need to ask yourself.
And thank you for asking it. And Audrey, we're going to turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you. This was so wonderful. I can't thank you enough, both of you, Sophie and Deborah, for this wonderful presentation. Especially during this time, those tips that you provided are enormously valuable. I actually was like making a mental list as I went down of things I need to use. But we also wanted to mention how helpful and entertaining your daily tips are on YouTube for managing stress. Your insights during this presentation, in your books, online, everywhere, are meaningful, relatable, and incredibly helpful. We are so grateful for the opportunity to learn from both of you tonight and look forward to applying these strategies in our daily life. You guys are wonderful to watch. It's fun. So thank you. And thank you also to Federation for offering this wonderful event, and to everyone who joined us tonight and really participated. It was really exciting to be here together. So thank you.
Thank you.